Mario, Sonic, Metroid, Street Fighter. These series are responsible for some of the most famous and beloved video games ever made, and they all have one thing in common. They're all Japanese. Not surprising, really. I mean, 2 of the big 3 call this country their home. Like, you think they have a pretty strong presence in the game industry? But truth be told, when you hear the term Japanese games, most of us don't typically think Zelda or Mega Man. No. What immediately springs to mind is something very different. Everyone plays games for different reasons, and if your reasons are the world, the characters, the story, and the discovery aspect of it all, RPGs are right up your alley. And even more luckily for you, that genre comes in 2 distinct flavors. If you want a more personal story where your choices shape anything and everything related to how events unfold, then you and Bethesda are about to become besties. Over in the land of boob cakes and body pillows, however, things work a bit differently. Their philosophy is to put you in the shoes of characters that were designed for you, and typically have predetermined destinies as opposed to the one you make for yourself. Now at first, considering the appeal of an interactive art form is that it gives you agency, this sounds like a step backwards. But if companies like Atlas and the old school Square are any indication, that couldn't be further from the truth. The best Japanese role-playing games can be enjoyed long after the gameplay has become outdated, simply because the stories they tell are so good. Why do you think they still boast some of the largest and most devoted fan bases out there to this day? But before you go dropping your college tuition on the entire Atlas catalog, know that like everything else in the universe, JRPGs are not perfect. In fact, there are a multitude of hurdles they have to jump over just to be decent, more so than a lot of other genres. And today's episode is about a game that, for one reason or another, hit every single one on the way to the finish line. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, fans and trolls of all ages, this has been too long in the making. Oh yes, it's Rhine time. Once upon a time, some designer off in Japan thought to themselves, man, the console wars would have been so much more awesome if they had boobs. This process of turning an idea, object, or whatever into an anime girl is known as moe personification, and you can see it in everything these days, from Concole to Earth-chan. Every single one of these ladies is standing in for a different console, and serving as the goddess of their respective lands. Neptune herself even has a neat backstory, standing in for the theoretical Sega console that would have launched after the Dreamcast, codenamed the Neptune. Now you may be thinking, that is the dumbest thing, and the most awesome thing. And don't worry, the devs know that. That's why they built this story specifically to not take itself too seriously, and instead to serve as a more light-hearted take on this industry that we all know and love. So hang on a minute, we've got anime girls, video games, classic turn-based gameplay, in-jokes and references, and we get over 80 hours of it to enjoy? This is gonna be the best JRPG ever!
It's nice to meet you, Nepe. Oh, is it confusing you? Okay, then you can call me Neptuna, Nep, Neppermint, or... Okay, then I pick Nep. It's nice to meet you, Nep.
This is gonna be the worst JRPG ever! Yes, right. I forgot to mention that some of the minor characters represent the various companies that worked on Hyperdimension Neptunia, such as Compile Heart, Gust, and Idea Factory. Compa especially I find to be an interesting case because this woman is about as sharp as a beach ball. And you'd think she wouldn't be, because this is what a company willingly released as the physical manifestation of what they're all about. The rest of the cast doesn't fare much better. Noir is boring as dirt and fails to do anything important the entire time she's on screen. I don't even want anything to do with Blanc, and all of their character development combined over the entire game is about as deep as a sidewalk crack. The only one I got even remotely interested in was Vert, aka the Xbox goddess. That's because she's into video games herself, seems to genuinely care about her people, and is often the voice of reason among the four deities, or as reasonable as you can be with people like this. Here's the crazy thing though. I think her and Blanc were originally supposed to be swapped. Think about this. Vert is visually the oldest of the four goddesses, and has a legitimate love for games as an art form. Meanwhile, Blanc is an irredeemable little you-know-what, and has no reservations about slinging profanities at anyone who comes within range. Now, doesn't that remind you of something? This is even weirder when you realize that the Xbox generally isn't liked in Japan. In fact, it's the worst-selling console of the three in that region, bar none. The point I'm trying to make is that it doesn't feel like much thought was put into any of these designs, or the presentation as a whole for that matter. Presentation is always one of those very divisive subjects. I mean, people say graphics don't matter, but every video game I've ever played has had them. We tend to forget this is an interactive audio-visual medium, meaning by default, presentation counts for a solid portion of your grade. This is especially true in RPGs, where the entire point is to get yourself immersed in a world. Now look at this. No set dressing, no atmosphere, no attempts to tie all the various environments together into one cohesive picture. I don't remember the name of a single location in this game, and that's not just because of the years-long gap, I swear. Last time I played Dark Cloud 2 was when I was a teenager, and I can still recall the names and defining features of every single area. I'll do it right now. The underground channel, confined, cool, and metallic. You never know what's waiting for you around every corner. Rainbow Butterfly Woods, peaceful, beautiful, and serene, but also mysterious and maze-like. Palm Brinks, modern, secluded, and full of life. Also, the best accordion you'll ever hear. I think you get the point. The interesting part about that comparison is that DC2 and Neptunia both use similar systems for their dungeon layouts. All of the maps are made out of building blocks, aka pieces of environment that can be easily locked together in any number of ways to create more areas easily. If you've ever used something like Doom's Snap Map, it's essentially the same principle. One of the key differences, however, is that in Dark Cloud 2, if something is labeled as a new area, you're not going to find blocks from the previous one in it. This means the levels in Dark Cloud 2 have a very strong theme, a definitive character that makes it feel at home in that particular part of the world. There are reasons these places are the way they are, and why you won't find any other location that looks quite like them. Because of that, they feel unique and manage to stick out in my mind despite being your bog-standard forest, beach, and lava levels, because they're not those things. They're anything but standard. They go out of the way to make themselves feel special. And then there's Hyperdimension Neptunia. Neptunia's dungeons couldn't feel any more out of place. You're often given the barest possible premises for these areas to exist in the form they do, and the ones that actually have a greater impact on the world at large or hold special significance for one reason or another are few and far between. Not to mention, it has no qualms throwing the exact same environments at you time and again, seemingly at random. For crying out loud, half the levels in this game are palette-swapped caves. Stepping into one of Neptunia's dungeons feels like entering a pocket dimension, a self-contained space with no bearing on or connection to everything else around it. To be fair, this isn't the only game I've seen try to cram its overworld into a menu, but NIS, one of the very companies that supposedly worked on this thing, did it far better. Compare the caves in Neptunia to the mansions in the original Disgaea. Vyre's and Hogmiser's pads are both huge castles with monumental hallways, but each one is constructed very differently. It has a totally different tone, feel, and personality. While Vyre's prefers a more laid-back and calm aesthetic, Hogmiser loves to flaunt just how wealthy he is, gold plating and adorning gems on everything in sight. And not only does it make each one feel unique, but it also tells you something about the characters that run these joints, giving you a look into who they are and what their personality is like. What do the environments in Neptunia tell us about the characters and the ecosystem within them? Pfft, search me. Unless it turns out that abandoned factories are the natural habitat for dragons in this world. Oh, but don't worry, it gets worse. When you look really closely at this game, you realize that a huge number of assets, mechanics, and even environments are ripped straight from one of the other games these companies have worked on, Trinity Universe. They don't even make reference to it. These things are just there, trying to be passed off as wholly unique creations. So not only is this the threadbare minimum of what even qualifies as a game world, but half of it is from a game you already paid for. Hyperdimension Neptunia was the original asset flip, a full 2 years before Steam greenlight. It's so bad that the boss in the post-game bonus dungeon shares its model with the final boss of the game. No reason given as to why. It's not the same character, they have no connection in the plot, and there isn't even some clever twist as to why you're fighting it again like in Breath of Fire 3. It's just there because we felt like we needed a bonus dungeon, I guess. Come on, guys. I know your budget was like $10 and a bag of Funyuns, but that's shiny Pokemon levels of cheap ways to pad out the experience. If you want to give your game more content, make it feel like a meaningful addition, yeah? But we'll expand more on the actual effort put into this game in a bit, because I've gone on way too long without talking about how Neptunia actually plays. Turn-based combat has seen a lot of evolutions over the years, and rightfully so. As technology keeps getting better, we've seen the limitations on this type of gameplay get shattered, adding all kinds of neat touches like the action commands in Mario's various RPGs or Square's own active time battle system. But I think the most interesting way you can approach turn-based combat is to play to the strengths of its slower pace. Compare a game like Bayonetta to something like Fire Emblem. In Bayonetta, you're making 100 little decisions every moment that have varying degrees of influence on how well you do. But even if you screw up here and there, no one mistake is going to cost you the entire fight, and that's by design. With the sheer amount of options you have every second in that game, if each one had a drastic impact on your performance, Bayonetta would be downright unplayable due to its difficulty. And while most RPGs aren't quite that punishing, they do have a significantly smaller room for error. That's because when you slow down the action, suddenly it becomes about tactics. You have all the time in the world to make your decisions. You have room to focus on the ramifications of every single choice you have, and thus, for them to feel just as satisfying, you have to make all of them count. Turn-based RPGs are a thinking man's game. Atlas has this down to a science. Those games, and especially Shin Megami Tensei, are about always living on a razor's edge. They're about preparation, about planning for every possible outcome, about gathering information on and adapting to an ever more threatening collection of adversaries. You can gain all kinds of bonuses by pummeling enemy weaknesses, but that works for them too, meaning if you get cocky at any time, even if you're technically over-leveled for the area you're in, you could still find yourself in trouble very quickly, and that's what makes them so engaging. Those games are interesting because they're tense. You have to be paying attention all the time. Otherwise, you're quickly going to find yourself on the wrong end of a game over screen. And then there's Hyperdimension Neptunia. How this game tries to shake up the formula is with a combo system. See, when you tell your character to attack, they don't just throw a punch or swing a sword or whatever. Instead, you can give them various button commands to perform certain attacks instead of others. And as you level up, you'll unlock longer command chains with more moves to use in them. First problem. This abstracts the numbers. It makes it very difficult to tell which moves are more powerful than others, and which combos will be the most beneficial to you in battle. And bear in mind, damage is rarely consistent either, meaning you'd have to add up all the numbers together, average them out from several other battles against varying types of enemies, do the same thing for other combinations of moves, and that's assuming you don't level up in the middle of all this or find better equipment that'll skew the results, and that's just way too much work for far too little reward, because the real travesty is how it doesn't even matter. I got through literally the entire game by spamming the same moves at every enemy over and over again. No matter what I was fighting or where I was fighting it, the exact same strategy worked ad nauseum. You would never get away with that in Chrono Cross. That game also had a combo system. However, not only did it involve far fewer attacks, but light, medium, and fierce hits all had a very noticeable difference in how powerful they were. It was also much cleaner and simpler to understand. Hitting with one attack increased your chances of landing with another, meaning the safest strategy was to start with the very accurate light attacks and slowly build up to your heavy hits. However, if you needed some quick burst, you could roll the dice on a stronger move right from the start and hope it paid off. You could even throw a spell in right at the end for even more damage, but the trade-off was that your character would be out of commission for longer and have even fewer action points to use during their next move. It keeps you on your toes as the battle progresses, almost telling a story from when you chose to go all out as opposed to playing it safe. When you pulled a clutch move that saved your team, but had to deal with the ramifications of that overexertion for the next few turns. When you took a big risk on a stronger push that just managed to kill an enemy because of it. Or when that gamble blew up in your face and turned the tables in the enemy's favor. There's so much natural drama that happens in every single battle of Chrono Cross, and that's the real joke here. Neptunia's system does all of these things to give it the illusion of greater depth and complexity, yet is laughably basic by comparison. Oh, and speaking of jokes, you want to hear a good one? This game's items. Instead of traditional potions and ethers, all of Neptunia's items are constructed on the fly, using the same 3 basic materials. For example, if you want to make a potion, you need a lot of material A, just a little bit of material B, and none of material C. But you don't just get to use the item. You have to set the AI of your characters to adjust when they'll automatically use some items over others. But it's not just a switch you can turn on and off like in Final Fantasy XII or something. You have to earn the percentage points of them actually using that skill when you want them to from leveling up. Oh yes. So no matter how well you prepare, how much you try to ready yourself for an encounter, until you hit level 40 or so, there will always be the slight chance that your characters will simply forget to heal themselves and die due to no fault of your own.
Hell, I just have one question. What? Why?
No, seriously, why? What was wrong with just having an item command? What game design problem were you trying to solve here? Were you aiming to eliminate the downtime most people spend using items on their turn instead of attacking and contributing to the fight? If so, then you shouldn't have made it percentage-based. If it's only a chance, you still needed to give players an item command so that they had that consistency to fall back on, because in that situation, the auto-heal would have just been a lucky bonus. And beyond all of that, what logical sense does this system even make? Are you telling me that these characters are so stupid that they need to be taught how to open a jar?
Do exactly as I do. Exactly as I do. Exactly. Exactly.
Compile Heart failed one of the most common and cliched pieces of advice on the planet. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Oh, and that treasure locator item that was lifted from Trinity Universe? Yeah, that thing has a cooldown, and an insanely short range. Because of course it does. That seems to be a common theme in Neptunia, actually, and one that, for your information, most RPGs actively try to avoid. Think about this. Why would I want to use the combo system if I could just do one quick attack with the same damage and effects? Why would I want this weird luck-based item usage system and risk tons of unnecessary continues when they're totally avoidable in practically any other game? Why give field items a timer before they can be used again? Like, I know a treasure chest is here. What exactly am I supposed to do while I wait? Respect your players' time. But speaking of respect, all of the issues I've mentioned thus far are symptoms of my biggest problem with Hyperdimension Neptunia. The problem that made me realize I had to talk about it, and the reason I never gave up on this review. The gameplay is gauche, the world and characters are lackluster at best, the presentation itself has so many cut corners that it looks like a perfect circle, and while that may seem to paint a particular picture about the developers, I want to engage the brakes on this review for a second so we can take a look at the Japanese version of Neptunia versus the American one. Bear in mind, when this game first came out in Japan, it was received incredibly well. In fact, GameWatch even cites the parody aspect as one of Neptunia's most appealing traits. So, the devs had a good thing, and they wanted to share it with more people. How do you expand your market in that case? Simple, by sending your game to other regions, of course. But this is why I said in the beginning that JRPGs have more pitfalls to avoid than most other genres, because to come out in the States, these games have to survive the incredibly perilous journey through localization. Localization is a minefield of a profession because by default, you have to deal with issues like differences in culture, what people perceive as censorship versus simply being in good taste, etc. How many boob sliders have mysteriously fallen overboard on their trip across the Atlantic? How many female characters have suddenly aged a few years to make them viable romantic interests and/or swimsuit models? And I'm sure y'all remember this bit from the 90s.
These donuts are great! Jelly-filled are my favorite!
RPGs have this even worse because so much of those games is made up of dialogue to begin with. And then you take something based mainly in comedy like Hyperdimension Neptunia, and everything falls apart. Out of all the universal concepts in writing, humor is something that simply does not translate. Not 100% anyway. As I mentioned before, Neptunia isn't just an artistic depiction in games, it's an artistic depiction of games. It's meant to parallel the entire medium, to be both a spoof and a functional work in its own right. That's why the world is called game industry. Instead of making clever jabs and saying what needed to be said, however, we got gems like this.
I believed in him. I knew he was coming to find me, but I couldn't keep waiting in a different castle. Please, don't tell the plumber I'm happily living with another man.
Oh my god, Peach is unfaithful. I never noticed that before. You guys are freaking geniuses. Hey, I got a better one for you, okay? Oh man, this is brilliant. Check it. Those mushrooms Mario eats, they make him taller because he's getting high. But the real disappointment here is that we were lucky that sequence even had a dedicated actor. Half the time, we don't even get that far. Remember how I said people tend to forget this is an audio-visual medium? Sometimes that includes developers. Some of these scenes just consist of the girls commenting on something they happen to be seeing. No joke, there's a Street Fighter parody where we don't see a single parody Street Fighter. We just have to take the cast's word for it that there's a woman with huge hips and a sumo wrestler beating up a car. I get that otome is a popular format in Japan. I'm not a big fan of it myself. I prefer to see your characters actually be a part of the world you're building. But if you're going to go the visual novel route, you need to at least write it like a novel. Concise but descriptive and clever. For example, imagine if the dialogue had gone something like this. What's the sumo doing to that car? Well, the sign says parking for Honda only. I guess they're fighting for the space. They never crack a single joke during this whole bit. It's just a reference for the sake of a reference. It's not trying to say anything or make any kind of commentary. It's just there to help maintain the illusion that this world has anything even remotely to do with the subject matter. How did they make a world centered around video games that has no video games in it? Look at this crap. This is their Sonic the Hedgehog reference. Sonic Dreams Collection was a more accurate representation. And before you get on my case about legalities, this thing has Sega's blessing. They gave the developers the rights to use Sega's IPs, and it even specifically advertises on the back of the box both a picture of Altered Beast and the ability to, I quote, summon characters from nostalgic games. And let me tell you, they spared no expense.
Show 'em. I'll totally get you.
In time.
Yup, that's it. That's all you get. No turning into a dragon, no items popping out of your foes and giving you a power-up, no Zeus descending from the sky and being like, rise from your grave, and reviving all your fallen allies, nothing. It's a gif of a sprite that dive bombs the enemy and engulfs them in a particle effect so basic it looks like it came from the Unity Assets store. I don't understand. These guys are game companies. What happened to all the franchises they own? Oh, right. My bad. Wouldn't want to suggest anything that might cut into the bottom line now, would I? Between all of this, is it any wonder why Neptunia got absolutely annihilated by Western reviewers? But again, let me reiterate that the Japanese version fared much better. So when you combine that with the misguided gameplay, the low production values, and the haphazard translation, you start to get a better idea of what actually happened here. If you look at both the opening splash screens and the back of the box, everybody and their mother has their names on this thing. However, when you look a little closer, Gust, NIS, and Sega are listed as either publishers or distributors. Only Compile Heart and Idea Factory actually contributed to development itself. Specifically, it was Idea Factory's Naoko Mizuno who came up with the concept in the first place. In an interview with Tech Gaming, the idea behind Neptunia's initial creation was clear, to serve as both parody and representation. But what really caught my eye was this question about if the series has fully lived up to ambitions yet, to which the answer was a pretty definitive no. And that's when the initial state this game launched in started to make a lot more sense to me. The idea behind involving so many companies was probably to realize what I'm complaining about, a world that actually felt like a proper reflection of the gaming industry. However, none of the companies involved seemed to be wanting to play ball. Idea Factory already wasn't the biggest developer on the planet when this game was being made, so without the funding needed to make an idea this ambitious realize its potential, disaster was bound to strike. I would not be surprised if development for this thing began immediately after Cross Edge released. That's a 2-year development window for those of you not paying attention. What's more, Trinity Universe was also being developed during this time, and released a little less than a year before Neptunia did, meaning the team was pulling double duty for a majority of that period. No wonder you can find bits and pieces of it all over the place in Neptunia. They probably didn't have enough time to create assets just for this. So why did they try developing 2 gigantic RPGs at once like that? I couldn't find any source addressing it, but considering Gust Corporation and NIS also had their names on that one, my theory is that it was the only way they'd even sign off on Neptunia. Sort of a you scratch my back, we'll scratch yours kind of thing. Except if the quality of the final product is to be believed, they never really returned the favor. But what about Compile Heart? They helped out, right? Well, here's the thing. At the time of Neptunia's development, Compile Heart was a fairly new developer. Their experience as a company was still fledgling at best, especially compared to Idea Factory, who's been around since 1996. Compile Heart also makes a lot of games. And I do mean a lot of games. In the 4 years between their founding and Neptunia's release, they had been involved in the development of 32 games. 32 games! James and Robert Romine are turning green looking at this portfolio. In fact, 11 of those were launched in the theoretical development window Neptunia had, so I imagine that their involvement in this title was pretty minimal. No wonder they have no problems tying their identity to a character with an IQ a grade lower than Bean Dip. Either they just didn't care, or it was a commentary on how the real devs viewed these people. No wonder Gus looks cute and inviting, but is a conniving and money-minded little scumbag in reality. That's probably a reflection of how Miss Mizuno felt when dealing with them. And that's probably why IF is emotionally dead. If I had to work under conditions like that, I'd be pretty done with the world, too. God, I hope my theories about how all this went down aren't true, because if they are, that pretty much kills my respect for every single company involved in this. Look, I can't confirm for sure how much better the original script was. I don't speak Japanese, but considering the quality of what we got instead, I'm pretty sure NIS America doesn't either, which blows my mind considering these are the same people that brought us Disgaea. I'm glad the game did well despite these hang-ups, that at least in the original script, you could tell that there was some heart. They legitimately care. They put in time. You know what? No. Out of all the leaps of logic I'm going through here, convincing myself that the developers actually cared about what they were building in this case is not one I'm willing to make. Here's a little behind the scenes for you. This script was originally a lot harsher. Version 1.0 tore into Idea Factory and the almost toxic corporate culture surrounding Japanese media as a whole. Yeah, this isn't just specific to video games. Go watch Super Eyepatch Wolf's video on what it's like to be a mangaka. But upon revealing said script to Hidden in the Truth and the rest of the team, the almost universal feedback I got was that it was too negative. So they helped me figure out a new angle to work off of, and that's part of why this episode took so long to make. Not because I had a hard time picturing a downtrodden developer story, but because my heart just wasn't in that narrative. Not this time. Not for this game. So, I'm sorry, man. I know I'm going off the reservation on this one, and I know you feel kind of insulted as a writer yourself when I pick on these guys, because, believe me, it doesn't bring me any joy either. I want to believe that all artists are in this for the passion like you and I are. I want to be optimistic enough to say that this wasn't Idea Factory's fault. But at the same time, I've seen enough bullshit in this industry to know that not every dev puts 100% into what they do. Peter Molyneux, Randy Pitchford, Dennis Dyack, Phil Fish, Tim Schafer, Electronic Arts, Valve, Blizzard, Ubisoft, Randall Herman. Shall I continue? Because I could keep this going for quite a while. When a person's heart and soul was put into something they made, you can feel it. Malice taught us that. Remember that episode? So to bring this back, that's the reason I never gave up on this video, the main kicking point that compelled me to make this episode. Hyperdimension Neptunia is one of only 2 games in existence where I walked away from it feeling absolutely nothing. I'm not angry, I'm not sad, I'm not disappointed, and I'm certainly not entertained. In fact, the first thing I did when I was done was immediately start playing something I actually enjoyed because I needed to cure the fact that I felt emotionally numb. I can't even say I learned anything from the original Neptunia. Everything I've gone over in this video was something I already knew. This just gave me an excuse to talk about them all in one place, but... No, you know what? That's not fair. There is one thing Hyperdimension Neptunia inspired in me. See, I'm a creative type too. I love this genre, and since I was a kid, I've had the desire to make games like the ones I grew up with. Nay, to make games even better than that. It's something I've slowly come to realize over the course of this video becoming a thing, and if I may invoke one more old piece of advice, the best revenge is a life well lived. Well, I'm taking that to heart. As of this video, I will have begun a journey to create a JRPG that is both better received and better selling than this. This is more than wanting to help the good apples out there prove that this genre can be so much more, and this is more than to help create the kinds of games that I want to play. I want to binge on guys like Mark Brown, Matthew Mitosis, and Super Bunny Hop. I want to go to conventions, learn from the best, and make connections. And I want to get my hands dirty. I want to sink time into actual game development every single day. I want to push the limits of both what I and the programs I work with are capable of. And at the end of it all, I hope to have built games that will blow your freaking mind. Important games, games that make you think, games that are pure fun from beginning to end, games that make developers like Compile Heart step back and go, what are we even doing over here? And I'm not gonna forget this YouTube thing either, far from it. With RTGs 25 out of the way, it's time to hit the ground running harder than I ever have before. Let's hire Ice Cold Koopa as an editor so I can produce videos faster than ever. Let's commit ourselves to a video every single week like was the original intent. Let's keep up the pace over on Twitch with a new streaming series. Let's bring back the Pizza Cast in a new and even better form than before. Let's make 2018 the year of Team Pizza. And let's make the industry a better place than it would have been without us. So what do you say, guys? Drawman, you with me?
Hell yeah!
Hidden in the Truth, you with me?
What the hell?
Coops, you with me?
Let's do it.
Alright then, gentlemen. Let's go make history.
Run away!
What killed the dinosaurs?
This is getting exciting!
Ice Age! Night! Hell breathes over. Stay cool.